Thank you for the lovely invitation and the introduction. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Mitch, down there, for inviting us. And let's hope the equipment works. All right, so according to the British census that was conducted in 2021 in England and Wales, there are about, 46% of British population identify as Christian. And a large segment after that is people who identify as of no religion. So in this survey, we wanted to capture the Christian views of Jews and Israel and Israeli-Palestinian conflict through a survey. And this is part of a much larger project that we have been conducting for already 8 years, including multiple surveys in the United States to capture the Christian views of Jews and Israel. So what we'll do here today is to compare British with American Christians on multiple questions and multiple aspects. So we're going to throw on you a lot of graphs and tables and data, but I think that we will be able to see through all of this like an interesting narrative about the views that British Christians have toward Judaism, Jews, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, we wanted to include as many of those who are of no religion, yes? Because what exactly does it mean into the survey, and you will see the data and you will see yourself what does it mean to be of no religion. Okay. Yes. Oh, this is not from our survey, but I just wanted to show you a comparative research around the world about belief in God. Just to put you in where the United Kingdom stands, it's right here, yes, somewhere quite at the end of a comparative, global comparative around the world. The United States here, 82%. Some studies even say it's 90%. The United Kingdom stands around 50%. Okay, so some basic data about the survey. Every time there is a survey, we need to give some basic information. We conducted the survey between December 9 to 20. So in the mid-December 2024, and we had a sample of a little bit more than 2,000 respondents, and the survey was conducted online using a non-probability sample that we hired a group called the SINT group that will find, that we will have correct measures of British population, demographics, age, race, and all those things. So this is what I just said, and the sample provides 95% confidence, ensuring that the sampling errors do not exceed about 3%, which is actually quite good. All right, so we have used a survey that we have conducted in the United States as the base to compare it with the British. And so the survey in the United States, we conducted it on March 2024. Again, about 2,000 respondents. Again, margin of error about 2.7%. I'm not going to go over all of this information, just for you to see kind of the baseline of comparison, the two groups. Okay, so some basic facts about Christianity in the United Kingdom. Okay, so we asked the question, were you raised Christian? And in which denomination? This was the screening question. And according to the results, as we can see, the largest movement within the United States is Catholics. About a third of British Christians are Catholic. And all the rest are Protestants, yes, with the exception of Greek Orthodox a little bit. Now, the next group is Anglican, and then, I'm not going to read everything, but then there's Methodist, Pentecostal, other, which I guess it is the non-denomination, Baptist, Presbyterian, no Christian upbringing. These are the converts to Christianity, Greek Orthodox, and Evangelical at the end of the you can switch. Okay, aside from weddings and funerals, on average, how often do you attend church and religious services? So here you can already see comparisons, and you can already see that basically British and American Christians are kind of similar in the way they attend church, more or less, with a little bit difference between the groups, but it's more or less similar. And we can say that those who never, seldom, or a few times a year attend church here in the United States is about 55%, and the rest, 45%, come to church more often. It's similar to the United States. And how often do you read the Bible? Again, so there are some similarities here between the two surveys, where you can see those who say never or seldom here in the United States. If you take these two categories, never and seldom, and you put them together, you bundle them together, you see similar results to that of the United States, identifying as Christians but never or seldom read the Bible. And I want to make it's around 40-45%. Those who read the Bible at least once a week, you can see the numbers here by yourself, it's about 30%. Now, if we are breaking it down according to denominations, we see that those who read the Bible often tend to be the Pentecostal, the Evangelical, are the ones who are the Baptist. These are the ones who read the Bible often, whereas you can see Catholics, Anglican, and so on, less. We will see those Pentecostal charismatic, you will see them, the numbers are really high on everything almost that we measure. Okay, what do you think about the Bible? So we gave multiple options. One is that it is the literal word of God. You see about a third of the sample agreed with that statement. Another third agreed with the statement, it is the word of God, but not everything should be taken literally. It is the work of humans inspired by God, it's 25%, and the rest is just, it's not the word of God, or I don't know. It's interesting to see the big difference in the numbers between Americans and British to this question that I don't know. Yeah? Those who said it is the word of God, the literal word of God, if we want to break it down according to denominations, what we see is that Pentecostal charismatic, I told you, yes, and Evangelical Baptist, and interestingly, Greek Orthodox also, half of them agree that it's the word of God. It should be taken literally. And, you see the rest. Also Catholics, about 40%. We saw it also in America, that you already. There are, in the United States also, Catholics who are, on every aspect, are actually evangelicals, but they identify as Catholics. Yeah, so you see, those surveys are really opening a window to look at ourselves in a very interesting way. Please continue. Okay, so this is a question we didn't ask Americans. So this is we don't have a base to comparison, but we gave multiple options to examine the spirituality of the respondents. And we gave the following options. I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm a Christian, and Christianity is the only true religion. I'm a Christian, but Christianity is not the only true religion. I believe in a different religion which is not Christianity, and I do not believe in God, or I don't know. So you see the numbers. 25% say I'm spiritual and not religious. About a third of the sample said Christianity is the only true religion, and another 30%, around 30%, said Christianity is not the only true religion. And if we take the spiritual and the not true religion together we see the majority of British Christians are what we call non-exclusive. Their Christianity is non-exclusive. All right, so if we want to break down according to the denominations, what do we see is that let's look first at those who say Christianity is the only true religion. We see here is that Evangelical and Baptist, Pentecostal, and Anglicans are the ones who are most agreed to this statement. You see the spiritual but not religious in all groups. And those who say Christianity is not the only true religion, those who came out the highest are the Anglicans, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, and the Greek Orthodox. Okay, let it a second to sink in. And if you want to take a picture, okay, I'm moving forward. Now, the National Association of Evangelicals, this is an American organization, National Evangelical Association, they came up with a definition of what is an evangelical. And it has 4 statements that if you agree to all 4 of them, then you're an evangelical. So the first is that the Bible is the highest authority of what I believe. About a third of the sample agreed with that. Now, we compare it to America, but this is not from our research, it's from a different research. So, I can't really guarantee for those other samples that compare it to America. So again, about a third of the sample said the Bible is the highest authority of what I believe. A fourth of the sample, 26%, said it's very important, me personally, to encourage non-Christians to trust Jesus Christ as their Savior. And another third of the sample said Jesus Christ's death on the cross is the only sacrifice that could remove the penalty from my sin. And another 30% said only those who trust in Jesus Christ alone as their Savior receive God's free gift of eternal salvation. So you can see by yourself that for all of these statements, about a third of the sample agreed with them. Now, if we take those who said they agreed with them, with all 4 of them, and we try to break down according to denominations, what we see here is, as we expected already, we already noticed that Pentecostals, Evangelicals, Baptists tend to agree with them the most. Now, what you see in the white box is the number of respondents, because it's like a small percentage, so we wanted for you to see if it says 15% of the Catholics agree with that. In our sample, it came to 98 people. That's what it meant. Now, these are questions that are very, very prominent in America, and we wanted to compare British to Americans on those questions, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how supportive are you of same-sex marriage? And as you see that British Christians are more in support of that than American Christians, which means that British Christians tend to be more on the left side than the Americans who are more conservative. And the same thing goes with abortions, which in America it's a big thing, yes, abortions. Do you think abortions should be legal? And if you can see that those who oppose abortions in the United States tend to be at a much higher numbers, and actually most Christians in the United Kingdom would agree with abortions. Okay, so now this is why we are asked to come here, yes? Jews. Okay, so it's just a plain, simple question. What is your opinion of Jews? As you see, overall, opinions are good, but American Christians like Jews better than the United Kingdom. And let's be honest, this is how they answer this question. And yeah, look at those who say poor and very poor. This is significantly more. It's small, but it's more than America. Do you believe that the Jewish people today have the right to the land of Israel by virtue of the covenant God made with Abraham? You see, there's a difference here between British and Americans, where you see 40% of British said yes, about 50% of Americans said yes. And you see that those who said no, where they stand in the United Kingdom, but we have to acknowledge there is a big, I don't know. So this is Christian education. This is your role. Okay, this was very interesting. Do you believe Jesus was Jewish? I don't know, only 50% said yes. I don't know if this is good numbers or this is bad numbers, but only 50% said yes. Oh, this is interesting. Who bears the blame for the crucifixion of Jesus? Now, historically, if you asked this survey 100 years ago, you probably would have seen this column going very, very high. So we say that at least Christian education on that level has done good things, but still about 7% agree that it is the blame of the Jews. We'll get to that more later. And there are two answers which are kind of like spiritual. It's the sins of humanity. We understand this is the opinion of the Roman Catholic Church. This is after they had the change of heart about Jews in the 1960s. And no one is to blame, it's God's plan. These are the spiritual responses, which are kind of like the most common responses. And okay, now we are getting into something a little bit juicy. Please, one, yes. So we took multiple, I know it's very small, I have to read it to you. Now I see that we have to fix this. We gave a few statements, and now I will read it to you, which are what we call anti-Semitic tropes. Jews have too much control over global affairs. Now, what you see the numbers now is the United States, not the United Kingdom, the United States. Jews have too much control over global affairs. Jews don't care what happens to anyone but their own kind. Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. Jews have too much power in the international financial markets. Jews have too much power in the business world. Jews are more loyal to Israel than to this country. Now, this is the United States. Now, let's see United Kingdom. Double. Okay, another set of statements. Jews have too much control over the British government. Jews control the British government? Come on. People hate Jews because of the way Jews behave. Jews are responsible for most of the world's wars. Jews have too much control over the global media. Jews think they are better than other people. Jews have too much control over the United States government. Let's see the American numbers. Let it sink. Now let's compare it to Britain. Israel is mostly to blame for the most recent war in Lebanon. So we took this while the war in Lebanon was taking place. Israel has committed genocide in the recent fighting in Gaza. Israel is just like apartheid South Africa. Israel deliberately targets Palestinian civilians. Israel is responsible for the violence in the broader Middle East region. I have heard of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, and I support it moderately or completely. Jerusalem, in its entirety, should be the capital of Palestine, and its government should not be shared with Israel. It is definitely not anti-Semitic to say that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. This is America. Take a deep breath. Go ahead. 10% of British Christians think that Jews control your government. Your government. And you see some of the parameters, it's almost double. So look, these are anti-Semitic stuff. And it resonates here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. Again, I'm sorry that the topic of the conversation is not a particularly pleasant one, but it is an important one. Right? We can't fix anything unless we know what's going on. And so this really exposes some elements of Christian-Jewish relations in Great Britain and in the United States. What we do is something that very few scholars do. We go beyond those basic descriptions that you've just observed, and we conduct proper statistical analysis that allows us to tease out the independent elements, the independent effects of how different factors impact anti-Semitism. What causes anti-Semitism, in other words, right? Or what factors correlate with anti-Semitic tropes that some people endorse. And as you can see here, these variables or factors that are associated with anti-Semitism are organized by their impact. From position 1, which is the highest, most impactful in terms of support for anti-Semitic tropes, to down to the bottom, 10, which has the least amount of potential impact on anti-Semitic views. What we have discovered is that individuals in the United Kingdom who identify as British Asian or as Asian tend to express significantly more anti-Semitic attitudes than folks that identify with other racial or ethnic categories. And this is practically threefold increase in support for anti-Semitism among individuals that identify with this race and ethnicity. In terms of particular attitudes or views, we found that those individuals that blame the Jewish people for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ are 176% more likely to endorse anti-Semitic tropes. And left-leaning, particularly far-left ideologues, folks that consider themselves to be ideologically very, very far left-wing, they also tend to be significantly more anti-Semitic than either centrists or right-wing proponents. We also found, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States, that age and generational differences matter greatly. We have repeatedly found that there is something going on with the younger generations that makes them less supportive of Israel and more supportive of anti-Semitism. And this is precisely what this data shows, that even after we control for the potential influence of religious factors, sociological factors, level of education, political and ideological views, even despite all of these controls, young people are still more anti-Semitic than the older generations. A potentially good explanation for that is that they have not witnessed the effects of Holocaust. They have not seen that terrible destruction of the Jewish people, not in the same direct and immediate way that the older generations have. We also discover that supersessionism, right, the belief that God's covenant with the Jewish people has never existed or has ended, are also associated with anti-Semitism. And the impact is quite substantial. Close to 60% more likelihood that someone who endorses this supersessionist view would also endorse anti-Semitic attitudes. Anglicans are less likely to be endorsing these anti-Semitic views. We have not been able to find statistically significant effects for other denominations. The only denomination where we could produce a statistically significant effect is for the Anglicans. In terms of educational attainment, right, a very logical and encouraging result. Those folks that are more educated are less likely to express anti-Semitic views. So this is something that's actionable. This is something that we can all do, right? Concerns about wealth and income inequality. The more concerned you are about wealth and income inequality in your country, unfortunately, the more anti-Semitic you are. Which again correlates with some of the historical tropes or stereotypes held against the Jewish people. Lastly, frequency of church attendance. This is another thing that's actionable. The more frequently you attend church, the less likely you are to endorse anti-Semitism. This is encouraging. And because we look at step-level changes, meaning how a person's view of anti-Semitism changes on the basis of how frequently they attend church. If they never attend, seldom attend once a month, attend every 2 to 3 weeks, attend weekly, attend daily. For every one of these steps towards daily attendance, the positive influence in reducing anti-Semitism increases. So someone who attends just seldom, 9.3%. less likely to endorse anti-Semitism. Someone who attends daily, 56% less likely to endorse anti-Semitic tropes. This is big. This is really important. And these are the variables that ultimately did not prove to be statistically important based on the level of statistical significance that we use in research. So not everything matters, at least not in a statistical sense, to explain the levels of anti-Semitism that Motti just discussed with you. Here's a little bit of a comparative for you with the United States. And again, what's really important is that in our research, we see these parallels across countries over time. And if you notice here, there are some really important parallels. The major contributors to anti-Semitism in both countries: support for the belief that Jews crucified Jesus Christ, supersessionism, and age difference, right? The generational differences between young, particularly under 30 respondents and the older respondents. Those common threads, drive anti-Semitism both in the US and in the United Kingdom. We're going to switch focus a little bit right now and talk about another critically important factor, critically important question, and that is Christian support for Israel. What factors, what elements are associated with greater support for Israel in the Christian community? We ask one very basic or elemental question that really serves as the centerpiece of most of our research over the last 8 years. In relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where do you place your support? And if you notice here, there's kind of two sides of that scale: lean towards support, strong support. On the one side, it's for the Palestinians. On the other side, it is for Israel. And in the middle, support neither. As you see, some people express a level of neutrality. This is not my conflict. I don't care, or I don't have a bone to pick, or I don't know enough about it. We've heard a number of different responses to that regard. Maybe pure ambivalence explains some of these findings. But what you can also clearly see here is that Americans are inherently a bit more pro-Israel, whereas the British people are slightly more likely to lean in favor of the Palestinians in comparison to the Americans. And there's still, roughly about the same percentage of people that say, I don't really know how to respond to this question. So this really, when we saw these data for the first time, I'm going to go back to this for just a second, the immediate question was, well, why do people feel this way, right? What explains these particular attitudes? And to do so, we looked at a number of theological, political, sociological, and demographic reasons. And that's what we're going to discuss with you in just a second. But before we get there, some more kind of information about how different denominations and different age groups perceive this question. As you see here, there are some groups that are inherently slightly more pro-Israel than others. Presbyterians in the UK, Pentecostals, evangelicals tend to express much higher levels of support than, let's say, Russian and Greek Orthodox, or the Methodists, or the Catholics. And as you might expect, based on what we've just talked about in relation to anti-Semitism, there are also important generational differences. Young people are less pro-Israel. They're more likely to support the Palestinians, and the results are pretty robust across every single level of support that you might express on this question. Young people tend to be more supportive of the Palestinian people than of Israel. Very strong support for Israel is rooted really in the older generations, particularly those that are 50 and above. So again, we conduct a ordinal logistic regression statistical analysis, crunch a bunch of data, do a bunch of robustness tests. I could bore you to death about that in the Q&A if you're interested. And what we find is that, and this is again, repeated finding. We find this in the US, we find it in the United Kingdom, we find it with different religious groups, with Catholics and Protestants alike. Theological beliefs matter greatly. They are the primal, the most important reason to explain why Christians support Israel. There are three specific beliefs that are elemental to that support for Israel. Biblical literalism, belief in the Abrahamic covenant, and belief that Jewish people continue to be important, indeed of principal importance to fulfillment of biblical prophecies. We find that Catholics of all the Christian denominations tend to be less supportive of Israel than the Protestants. There are some variations, but in general, Catholicism tends to promote either neutrality or greater support toward Palestinian side. What we also find is that frequent socialization with other people who express pro-Israel views is a really important factor in explaining why you yourself might be pro-Israel. So when you socialize with like-minded people, that really helps. Frequent interaction with the Jewish people and exposure to their religious customs, to their cultural practices is super important. Oftentimes, the Jews are perceived as the others, right? Othering of Jews is such a common thing. And the more frequently you interact, the less likely you are to engage in that. Conservatism, political conservatism, ideology matters greatly as well. We repeatedly find that individuals that either consider themselves conservative in the US or right-wing in the United Kingdom tend to be more supportive of Israel than either centrists or moderates or left-leaning individuals. Generational differences are quite substantial as well. We're going to talk about how much that matters in just a minute. Opposition to two-state solution. It used to be at least common in the literature to say, well, you could be pro-Israel and support the two-state solution at once. In our repeated surveys, we have found a negative correlation. For one reason or another, those folks that endorse this idea that Israel will exist alongside an independent Palestinian state, if you hold that belief, you're less likely to support Israel. Specific contemporary issues matter. Anti-Muslim sentiments or just a very cool feeling towards Muslims tend to be related to more pro-Israel sentiments. Concerns about anti-Semitism obviously predict your support for Israel as well. Folks that are very concerned about anti-Semitism are much more likely to support Israel. Concerns about social justice type issues. Specifically, we ask three questions that drive these kind of social justice issues. Same-sex marriage, concern about global warming and global climate change, and concern about racial and wealth inequality in your country. And what we find is that those folks that express extreme level of concern on those types of social justice issues also tend to be less supportive of Israel. Lastly, race and ethnicity proves to be important. In the US, we find that African Americans tend to find parallels with the Palestinian people in terms of their experiences and tend to be less supportive of Israel. In the United Kingdom, we found the same to exist for those folks that identify as British Asians or as Asian. All right, delving deeper into this. As I mentioned a moment ago, theology, eschatology, that is the study of end times, biblical literalism, matters greatly. If you look at the top three factors that influence support for Israel, it's unequivocal. What you learn in church matters. It matters a lot. You can see that the next variable on the list in terms of its impact on support for Israel is age. Under 30 respondents are less supportive of Israel, even after we account for all of these other potential explanations. What the heck might be going on here? We believe it's media influence. It's the echo chambers that young people find themselves, but it's also the type of coverage that exists. The older generations grew up seeing Israel as the victim of aggression by the Arab states, by the Nazis. The young people grow up with vivid imagery of Palestinian dispossession in Gaza, or Palestinian suffering as a result of Israeli action. And that's the only side that they see. And so they form their opinions on the basis of that very narrow-sided understanding that they observe in the media. And because we tend to gravitate toward news stories or social media sites that reinforce our existing beliefs and our existing biases, we go to the places that only reinforce this message rather than provide a corrective. And as I mentioned, some of the other variables here that matters. Again, what's really important, folks, is the parallels that exist across the pond. Whether we're talking about Americans, or as we like to say, Americans, or the British, right? The same set of variables matter. The same set of factors predict pro-Israel and anti-Israel views. Again, notice here that the biblical factors play massive role. Biblical literalism, Abrahamic covenant, belief that Jewish people are important to fulfill the biblical prophecy. These are elemental aspects of what is considered to be premillennial eschatology. And we repeatedly find premillennialism to be the most pro-Israel eschatological view. Well, eschatology refers to the study of end times. So let's get a little bit further into this and give you guys some graphic illustration of why America tends to be more pro-Israel than Great Britain. When we look at some of these factors that explain pro-Israel sentiment, it's really easy to see visually why Americans are more pro-Israel. Right? For example, when we ask Americans and the British, was Jesus a Jew? You could see the contrast. The Bible says Christians should support Israel, right? This notion of biblical literalism. You could see the difference, right? It's stark, more than twofold. Israel is important for fulfilling biblical prophecy. Again, a very stark difference between the blue, which reflects the British respondents, and kind of the whitish gray that reflects the US. Same thing is true about the covenantal relationship between the Jewish people and God, right? The essence of Abrahamic covenant. You could see that there is, more than 10% difference between the British and the Americans who say, yes, the covenant remains intact today. You could see that there is a twofold difference pretty much between the British, who say God never had a covenant with the Jewish people, and the Americans, right? This essence of supersessionism, right? This denial that Jewish people are God's people tends to be more prevalent in the UK, unfortunately. Eschatology, the study of end times, right? In particular, we look at how Christians understand the meaning of the millennium, right? Christ will rule for millennium, for 1,000 years. Does that mean literal? Does it mean some sort of a figurative way? And you could see that a literal interpretation, premillennialism. Premillennialism is the position that's most likely to ascribe deep level of importance to the Jewish people in the state of Israel in the prophetic visions, in the end times, in the judgment day, right? And again, the US is far more likely to see prevalence of that view. Amillennialism is an eschatological tradition that was developed in the Catholic Church that essentially says that the church has superseded, right, the Jewish people and is therefore no longer necessary for the fulfillment of the prophecies of the end time scenarios. And you could see that that amillennialism exists and is relatively prevalent in both countries, but again, unfortunately, in regard to both post-millennialism, which is also not a particularly pro-Israel tradition, both amillennial and post-millennial views are more prevalent in the UK than they are in the United States. I mentioned that Catholics are less supportive of Israel than Protestants. Again, a perfect visual illustration of the differences here. These differences exist in both English-speaking countries. How often do you hear members of your religious community talk about the importance of Israel? Americans are far more likely to encounter pro-Israel messages in their social circles than the British. This is so powerful. To know someone is to love them. That's not always the case, but it is the case in regard to this specific question. Frequent socialization, and I want you to notice something really important here. What really matters are just basic daily interactions, friendships, colleagues at work. That is far more important than being familiar or being imbued with Jewish religious thought or exposure to particular religious customs of the Jewish people. And you could see that because the US has such a much larger Jewish population, that the exposure to the Jewish people, that positive exposure, is far more likely to occur in the US than in the United Kingdom. Conservatism, right? Conservatives are more supportive of Israel. We asked a slightly different question in the US than in the UK because what liberal means in the US is different than what it means in continental Europe and in the UK. And so in the UK, we asked a question about far left, left wing, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the US, we use the more typical labels like extremely conservative, conservative, and so on. But the essence of what the people are responding to is the same, right? This is the same set of ideological principles. And you could see, again, that there are far more people that identify themselves as conservatives in the US, and we already saw the correlation between conservatism and support for Israel. Here's even more stark representation. Two-state solution seems to be incompatible with strong support for Israel. Those folks that are strongly endorsing and largely supportive of the two-state solution tend to be less supportive of Israel. You could see that in the US, there's a significantly large number of people that say that they're largely opposed to the two-state solution than in the United Kingdom. Concern about anti-Semitism, again, varies across these two countries. There are a larger proportion of Americans that are concerned about anti-Semitism. And more importantly, the impact of that concern on the pro-Israel views in the US is more consequential than it is in Great Britain. Someone who's concerned about anti-Semitism in the US is more likely to respond with intensity about their pro-Israel views than in Britain. In both countries, concerns about anti-Semitism, correlate with pro-Israel sentiment, but they matter more in the US. That's really what the slide is telling you. This could be potentially very complicated to digest, but let me simplify it for you. The more likely you are to engage in social justice issues, the more likely you are to believe in them, the less likely, by a lot, that you'll support Israel. Someone who says, I don't really care about social justice issues, I don't really care about racial injustice or inequality, or I'm not particularly concerned about income inequality in the United States, for instance, right? Compare that to someone who said, I am extremely concerned about racial injustice and inequality in the US. These kind of progressive values have a snowballing effect. The more you endorse them, the more likely you are to also express anti-Israel views. As you can see here, opinion of Muslims in both countries tends to be a statistically significant predictor of support for Israel. Those folks that have very positive opinion of Muslims do not tend to support the US and support Israel in large numbers. And we find that there are more people in the United Kingdom that tend to express positive opinion of the Muslims than in the United States. Some of that may be related to post 9/11 effects, more recent experiences in the US. We're not entirely sure, but we have repeatedly found this correlation in the data. Strong support for Israel by age cohort, right? Age matters a lot, and you could see that in both Britain and the United States, 18 to 29-year-olds are not supportive of Israel, but in the UK, those numbers are even smaller than they are per each age cohort than they are in the United States. In general, US creates a much more pro-Israel environment. For the first time in our 2024 survey, we asked a really interesting question that we haven't asked before, and that is, we asked our respondents to tell us, are you a first-generation immigrant like me and Motti, right? And then we asked them to say, how long have you been in the country? Under 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 25 or more years, or something like that. I don't remember the exact categories. And what we found is that the longer you have been in the US, the longer you have been exposed to that pro-Israel culture of the America, the more likely you are to become pro-Israel yourself. So assimilation in that pro-Israel culture in the United States matters greatly. We did not ask about the first-generation status in the United Kingdom, but my hunch is that that also matters in the UK. When we look at the British Asians in comparison to other racial and ethnic categories, again, we see a distinction. From my understanding of the demographics in the UK, the vast majority of the people in the UK who identify as Asian come from either Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or Indian background. And so now I'm going to pass the torch back to Motti, and he'll delve a little bit further into the discussion of young British Christians.
Okay, something that we found in this survey, which is really, really unique and interesting, that we want to share with you, is about young British Christians. So we asked, our first question was, how was it exactly? Are you identify as Christian? And then we saw, let's take a look. So studies consistently show that the young generation in the United Kingdom are generally less religious than the older generation. Young people are less religious. However, our study found some indications that young British Christians are exhibiting the opposite trend. What we were going to see is a reversal. It's a reversal that is taking place now in the United Kingdom, where younger generation of Christians may be more religious, observant than their parents and grandparents. More, not less, more. So, how often do you attend church by age cohort? Look at that. These are the blue. The blue is the young generation. It's more than 40% say that they attend at least once a week, and if you add to this the daily, you get almost to 50%. And look at the never and seldom. Who are the highest? The grandparents. The grandparents don't come to church, but the grandchildren do. Now, do you believe God's covenant with the Jewish people remains intact today? Look, this is 45% of the young people said yes. And the grandparents, only 23% said yes. Yeah? And look, those who said, I don't believe in God, Only 1.5% of the young people said that, yeah, compared to 6.7% with the grandparents. And I don't know. Look at the I don't know. No, those who don't know. The grandparents, 50% of the grandparents said, I don't know. But not their grandchildren, not their grandchildren. Now, we asked those statements that are identifying evangelicals, yes? The Bible is the highest authority of what I believe. Look, all of those 4 categories, the highest numbers are coming from young people. The lowest are coming from their grandparents. Yeah. So this is telling us that there is a religious revival that is happening right now in the United States. This is a religious revival. Don't clap, because we're going to look at some disturbing, because this is a tiger that you need to know how to ride. Really, because there are some scary things happening right now with this year. They are coming to church, but not necessarily, no. What are their views exactly? Okay, that's what I just said. In comparison to the under 30 American Christians, a much larger proportion of young British Christians endorse anti-Semitic tropes and unsympathetic views of Israel. Their religious revival does not seem to make them pro-Israel or less anti-Semitic. So remember those anti-Semitic tropes that we saw earlier? Pay attention. Jews have too much control over the United States government. The highest of those who agree with them are the young people, under 50. And they can be almost half. The grandparents are the least to agree to those anti-Semitic views. The young generation are the highest to agree to them. So I just gave you just as a comparison, as a visualization, for you to see what's going on with this young generation. You know, they are much stronger Christians than their parents and their grandparents, but they are also much more anti-Semitic. So we see something new here. In the United States, conservative religiosity typically is connected with pro-Israel and pro-Jews, but not here, not here. So British Christians, these are the concluding remarks. British Christians are less supportive of Israel and less likely to have positive perceptions of the Jewish people than American Christians. Their views include a higher percentage of stereotypical views of Jews compared with American Christians. Catholics are the least pro-Israel Christian denomination in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Protestants generally hold higher level of support of Israel. Unlike under 30 Christians in the United States, young Christians in the United Kingdom tend to be more religious than the older generation of Christians. Unlike young American Christians who tend to hold favorable views of Jews in Israel, young Brits are significantly more likely to hold more negative opinions of Jews in Israel than the older British Christians, although they hold higher levels of religiosity. So as I said, there's a tiger, you need to learn how to ride it, because otherwise it can go very, very bad places. Okay, I think we are done.
We're going to have a time of questions and answers just for the next several minutes. So you'll get your opportunity to ask Drs. Inbari and Bumin a question. We have some people manning microphones, a remote mic. Okay, we have someone on that. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think on behalf of, everyone here, thank you so much for doing this research. We really, really appreciate it. I will go and ask the first couple of questions as chair. A bit of feedback on the mic there. So I have 2 questions. The first is from the first slide. Why are Americans paid more than Brits? That's my first question. And my second question is, now there's a difference between correlation and causation. And you mentioned the term correlation quite frequently in your talk. But obviously, we've seen in those last few slides, we can see there's a difference between correlation and causation. We're obviously not telling people not to go to church. They'll make them more anti-Semitic. Just how did you factor in that difference between causation and correlation in your study?
So this is an excellent question. And generally speaking, statistical analysis is really good about identifying relationships between two factors or between multiple factors. But we don't stop here. In fact, after several questions, especially the really important ones like support for Israel, we ask the respondents to explain in their own words, why did you select this response? Why did you say that you support Israel? Well, why did you say that you support neither? Well, why did you say you supported the Palestinians? And so what we do is called process tracing or content analysis to really unpack the reasons for these views. And oftentimes, especially in the post-October 7th era, after the Hamas attacks, what we find is that pro-Israel sentiments go hand in hand with the belief that Israelis have the right to self-defense and that it's an appropriate, that supporting Israel is an appropriate response to the geopolitical situation in which Israel finds themselves. But beyond that, we see multiple individuals also express biblical kind of explanations in their own words. And so what we do in our book is we begin with the statistical analysis to identify robust, statistically significant correlations. And then we expound on those correlations with a very thorough content analysis of the actual words that respondents use to justify their positions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have a question from the audience? We'll go with this lady here at the front. Oh, okay. This lady here at the front. This lady here at the front with her hand up. There we go.
I'm not surprised with the survey, to be honest. So my question is, what can we do? What really can we do about this? Now, the reason why I ask is because I was explaining to this lovely lady earlier, when October the 7th happened, we're just a house fellowship, a house church that meets in Colchester, and we called the local synagogue to say that we're here, we love you, we're supporting you, we're praying for you. And the lady on the line said, you are the only church that actually reached out to us. So what can we do? Because we're just a few people meeting in a home. What do we do?
Excellent question. If I had all of those answers, I wouldn't be here. I would be maybe on Cayman Islands or somewhere else, multi-billionaire, But let me proffer some suggestions based on the data that you observed, right? It's not just about going to church. It's about hearing specific things and believing in specific things. So one of the things that Christians can certainly do is reinforce that Abrahamic covenant, gives the special and ongoing relationship between God and the Jewish people, that we have to honor it, that we have to respect it, and we have to promote it. The belief in biblical literalism, in reading the Bible for what it is, like Brian earlier described, rather than creating a symbolic interpretation that doesn't jive with the actual word of the Bible. Again, that's an important skill set that you can impart to the congregation. Exposure to the Jewish people. Yeah, I understand there are far fewer Jewish people in the United Kingdom than there are in the United States, but there are all sorts of cultural exchanges and collaborations that can happen that can increase the intensity and the frequency of that exposure. Another factor that we found to be significantly important for promoting more pro-Israel views is belief that Israel doesn't just simply, treat the Palestinian people as, in an apartheid-like conditions or concentration camp-like conditions in the Palestinian territories. Those people that perceive that the Palestinian treatment is relatively fair by the Israeli authorities also tend to be more pro-Israel. So presenting a more balanced view, one that shows that, there are many opportunities that Palestinians have in both occupied territories as well as in the Israel proper. And if they choose to utilize them, there are many beautiful things that can happen. I think that's another really important factor.
Yeah, if I can just
Yes,
add
please.
one. Just speak about it. Speak about it. And then, it will create the effect that makes a difference.
You have another question? This gentleman here with his hand up. Oh. Or if you want to go first, and then that gentleman there, yeah. Thank you.
Hi, just a question. I just wonder whether you have done a similar survey in theological colleges and seminaries, because what's exemplified by the data sets is the teaching and the quality of teaching that youth leaders and pastors and vicars and ministers are giving to their congregations, and hence why Jesus said, go make disciples and not just converts. So I was just wondering what's happening in theological colleges and whether you have similar research.
Yeah, so we have conducted this, it's actually not us, it's Chosen People Ministry, but they utilize it as, they've done a survey in the United States among 1,000 evangelical pastors. And if you want to read more the details, our book is actually for sale here at the bookstore, and you can get the book. It's only 20 quid, it's not that expensive for an academic book, yeah? But yeah, I would say that what we call the premillennial views are declining in those training institutions, and maybe other views are being more promoted now, and it creates the trickle effect that you're talking about. And as I said again, speak about it. Yeah. That's the first step, and other things will follow.
Yeah. And I would like to add that we teach premillennialism at KEDS.
If I may, I actually want to add something really important that we found about evangelical pastors in the United States. There's also an age and racial difference. What we have observed in the survey that's in our book is that premillennial pastors tend to be predominantly white and old. Post-millennial and amillennial pastors tend to be more racially diverse and younger. So guess what? The young ones, the hip, right, they find the amillennial and post-millennial pastors to be more hip, to be more like them. They gravitate to that message and away from the pro-Israel premillennial message.
Interesting. This gentleman at the front here. Oh, the one behind.
Hello. Did your survey pick up to any extent, particularly for the UK statistics, the impact of gaslighting? And I mention that because, for instance, the BBC were held up by having a very, very poor pro-Palestinian coverage after October with biased reporting. But I'm not sure whether there's similar in America. But would your UK survey have picked up any impact on that?
Exceptionally good questions, and this is one of the things that we really lament. It's very difficult to measure media effects on attitudes, to identify sources that are either conservative or liberal, to measure the extent to which a person receives 30%, 40, 50%, 80% of their information from one particular source. The more time passes between something that they hear on the news and time that they respond to the question, introduces noise, introduces potential biases, right, and other explanations. And so it's notoriously difficult in a statistical analysis, in a kind of very precise measurement way, to measure these media effects. We certainly discuss it in our book, and we look at it on a more anecdotal or, qualitative fashion. But it's difficult to measure that directly, but we are certain that it matters quite a lot. And the critical issue and we live in a world where information is available through so many different sources, that if someone doesn't like what they hear on BBC or Fox News, right, they're going to seek out whatever information source, no matter how reliable or unreliable it is, that'll conform, that'll reinforce their beliefs, right? News oftentimes today is not really used to generate new information about what's happening in the world, but rather to just reinforce our existing biases. And I don't know how to break that. If I could figure it out, I think it would resolve a lot of problems in this world.
Yeah, I just want to add to that one thing, is that we have to understand young people, we call it the TikTok generation. Yes, this is the TikTok generation. We still are not really understanding what this TikTok thing, is, and how it changed their mind and so on. And this may explain why young people tend to not to support Israel, and it has to do a lot with where they consume their information, at TikTok and on Instagram or whatever this is. And this is part of the answer to this question,
Okay. We have time for one more question. We're going to have a panel discussion after the break, after Ruben's talk. So we'll just go with one question, but you'll have a chance to ask other questions after. So don't worry. The chap in the back with his hand up, you'd take the microphone to him. That guy with with his hand up. There we go. That's the one.
Thanks. So I'm a Gen Z. Premillennial, so I think I agree with all what you're saying, but I think most of my friends are anti-Zionists and they're conservative Christians. I think a lot of it could be down to the fact that, yes, the Abrahamic covenant still stands, but we're tying that to the geopolitical entity of Israel. And I think, is Israel synonymous with nation state? I think they're kind of reacting against that kind of dispensational view that they're used to. I think that, could you comment on how we kind of combat that? Because that's what I've seen a lot of from youth in my own church and things like that. If that makes sense.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I'm not sure that either one of us understood fully what you were asking.
Sure. So obviously the Bible affirms the everlasting covenant towards Israel. Mm-hmm. So there will be a physical and spiritual restoration to Israel. We all agree. But I think a lot of people my age are like, how does that mean, therefore, the nation state of Israel, which is currently apostate, means we must support it unconditionally? If that makes sense, this subtle nuance there.
Can you support Israel without supporting the government of Israel?
This is an exceptionally good question, and of course we would argue that you can, right? Because the government of Israel reflects particular political coalitions or parties that are in power at one point in time. But I want to caution how far you want to take it. Because again, what we have found is that probably the most significant predictor of the most commonly shared anti-Semitic trope, the notion that Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are to your country, right, is anti-Zionism, right? So that line, that really thin line between criticizing the government of Israel at the time and criticizing the state of Israel can quickly devolve into anti-Semitism. And so finding that balance is not easy. There are some legitimate, in my view, there are some legitimate areas where we should question the actions of the Israeli government, and that we shouldn't equate support for Israel with support for Israeli government of the time. But unfortunately, the way it's oftentimes presented, those lines are blurred, and as a result, they bleed into general anti-Zionism and general anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much.